Hello everyone, and welcome to the session about planning your APT setup. My name is Michael Olsen, and I'm going to walk you through this session. So first of all, I just want to clarify and verify with my moderator that I have audio on.
That you do.
Awesome. So welcome everyone. This is a short, fast, and technical session on planning your ATP setup. So before we start the session, I just want to remind you that if you have any questions, you can do that in the chat or in the question section of this session, or you could go to our hub page and ask any questions during or after this session as well. Now, ATP stands for Automated Process Testing. Now, this is a feature of ClickLearn that is rising up, so to speak. More and more companies are in the phase where they really need to test every single time they get new versions. They may want to do some different kinds of quality assurance. They may even want to do robotics. This all falls into what we call automated process testing. Now, this is a bit different from what others know in terms of testing, because most tend to do this on a functional level using API calls to the system. ClickLearn, however, goes through the user interface. This also means that there are no coding required, and there are no requirements of having API access to the system. Now, during the session, I will bring you through three phases. The first phase will be how you should analyze your need and requirement in order to perform the automated process testing, how you can modularize this, and how you can record it. Now, as I said, it's a technical part that you need to consider here. And that means that in phase two, you also need to consider that you need to know the data behind what you're doing. You need to be able to control the input and outputs before you actually execute the automated process testing. Finally, in phase three, we touch base on some advanced topics about timing. That means when you have test cases where you have some actions that requires more time to execute, or you have forms that are slow at starting up, you may need to tweak the timings within your recordings. Then I will also briefly touch base on test cases. If you need to run through the same end-to-end process multiple times with different data, then test cases will help you. And then finally, I will show you and explain what kind of log that we have behind the automated process testing within ClickLearn. But let's get started. So in order to give you an example of this, I'm using the customer engagement system. I'm going to keep it fairly basic so that we don't get a very complicated end-to-end process during this session. But as I said, in phase one, it's all about analyzing what it is that you want to do. The example that I will give you will be in three parts. First, I want to create an account. From that account, I would like to get some information out of it. So I will provide the account name, and then I want to get something out of that account. Secondly, I would like to have a phase where I open up the newly created account. And thirdly, on that opened account, I would like to add a contact. So that's basically, when we think of it, three different phases within an end-to-end process. And that's the reason why I'm talking about splitting this up in modules, because we could, of course, with ClickLearn, do a single recording and get everything done within that. But looking forward, it will be much more efficient and beneficial for you to be able to reuse the bits and pieces that you have recorded separately. Now, as I said, when we do automated process testing, we simply use ClickLearn as we do for documentation to actually record the process that we want to automate. So I'm just going to do a recording session on one of the 3 parts here to show you how this is done. So I will start the recorder. I will record the navigation into accounts. I will click on new. Once the form is open, I will go to the account name field and I will type in test account, for example. So what I'm doing here is I'm recording a process. I'm using mouse and keyboard, and the input for this automation is, in this case, the input through the keyboard of an account name. It could also be selecting from a list some data that was available, but we'll get back to that in a second. Now, the second part about the data is what I want to get out of the system. So as an example, I could go into details and look at what kind of currency that I get out of a newly created account if I don't modify the currency. Now, one of the neat tricks that you can use with ClickLearn instead of clicking into the field is simply just to hover over the field and press Control-Shift to record that you want to get something out of this field. So finally, for the first part of the process, I will save and close this. That basically creates a new account. So once that is saved, I'll just stop my recording session and I will save this as customer engagement, new account. So that's the first bit in my end-to-end process. The second one would be to open an account. I'm not going to record it, but basically I would just go into the account list. I would select my account, and when that is open, then I would do a third one that actually created the contact. So I'm not going to spend time doing the 2 additional recordings. I have prepared them already so that we can look into them. So you can see that I have the add account, I have open account, and then I have an add contact. But before we go into the 3 that I have prepared, let's just look into the one that we just did. When we look into this in our editor in ClickLearn, you will find the standard steps that we have done so far. But when we focus on the technical aspect of automation, we go to the replay role. Now, within the replay role, it reveals what kind of data that we have used to feed the recording. Now you can see it says test account here. That was what I gave as inputs. Now for the APT, you have an easy link to open the data handling for it. You can actually click on load recording, and that will actually retrieve the data inputs and allow you to put it into this configuration file that will then feed the automation. So we can actually say this one, we want that account name should have that value, and we can update the recording. Now, once we do that, that allows us, without changing the recording at a later time, we can simply just change the data in here and then rerun our automated process testing. So when we do that, you can see that it actually changes to get the case value from the account name, and that will then be used for this. Now, the second part of handling the data is to get something out of the system. So you saw me how I recorded moving the mouse to the lookup field currency. Now let's try and double click on that. Now within this, you actually have an additional section called replay commands. Now this can be used to assure that a value is present, a specific value in a field. So you can actually validate and have the automation fail if it hasn't got the right value. In this case, I just want to pick it up and put it into the log file so that I can look at the log file at the end of the end-to-end process to see that the correct values are there. So I will set a case value. Now I want to call it account currency, and I could get a list of all the captured values. Now the neat thing about how ClickLearn technically identifies everything within the customer engagement system is that we know exactly what kind of form that we are on, what is the entity name, and what is the attribute within that entity. Those are the technical aspects within the system that you're working on. We also get the information of the actual value of the field. That is the unique ID of the currency record within the customer engagement system. And we also get the text representation of that value. So I want to store the text representation in this case. So setting that up allows me easily to capture how the process should run, control the input and the output of such a one. So when we finally look at this, we can do this on all three recordings. So I've shown you how I did it on add accounts. Now let's just try and open it up. You will see that it's basically the same thing that I did just before. If we look into the replay data, the only difference is that I had a different value here in the account name. So it's a different account that it will create. Now the second recording will be open account. Let's just look at that and go into the writer's role so that you can see what it's doing. So it's simply just clicking on accounts, selecting the account from the list of accounts. That's basically it. When we look at the replay data, I've done the same thing. So I've basically went into the open global replay data, loaded from the recording, and making sure that it's retrieving the value from this, but from a different recording. So let's just go in and look at this. So I basically went into this one here, made a case value get, and I could get it from a different recording, the one we just did, or the one that I did before, add account. And then I can select from the properties that are available within the automated process testing. That's basically how we set that up. And on the third recording, it's the same thing. So the third recording that is adding a contact, that is basically, if we go into the writer's role again, clicking on more commands when the form is open, clicking new contact, going into the first name field and last name field and typing in the values, saving and closing. So to bind all of this together, the bits and pieces that we have separately here, we actually create a book in ClickLearn. So we create a new book, and then we organize the recordings one by one in sequence that we wanted to execute. So add account first, open account, and add contact. So if we just go back to our customer engagement system again, let's just go back to the home page. Let's take and replay the entire book. We are now executing our automated process testing. So first step in this will be to execute the first recording. That will create a new account. So now it will execute the steps like we did in our recording. Click on new, go into the name field and type in the name. Go into details, hover over the currency and retrieve that output value and write it to the log. Saving and closing. That means the first part, the first recording has been executed. Now it will execute the next one in sequence from the book. Getting the list of accounts, selecting the account that we just created. And as you can see, it knows the system. It's not just clicking directly on a screen position. It knows exactly what to look for. Now the third recording is now executed, creating the new contact. So it will open up the quick create where it will basically, oops, and there I just did a mistake. So let's just try and do it like this. And when it's saved and done, then the replay has completed successfully. So if we look into this, everything has been done. It has been organized within a book, and you can even organize it within a shelf if you have very large and complex process testing scenarios that you want to execute. Now, once we are done, let's just end the session by looking at what comes out of this. So we can go into one of the recordings. So we can go into the add account. We can go to the replay role, and we can go and open up the replay data. So what you can see here is that our input is still the same. So we haven't done any changes there. Now it has now written out the output account currency with the value present on the newly created account. So this is the output that we get from the case. Now the log file that I mentioned in phase 3, that basically states one by one that we're starting the execution of the book, APT on customer engagement. A recording starts, add account, it gets a value. You can see the actual value that it gets. It sets a value, that is the output. Then the recording ends, then it starts next recording, gets that from the other recording, so that's the account name. And then you can see what it's actually typing in to perform the full end-to-end process. Now in phase 3, I also mentioned that you can work with multiple cases. So let's say this is my end-to-end process, but I want to repeat it multiple times. Now, what I can do in this case here is that I can actually go in, if we just skip the output, just focus on the input right now, I can go in and create a new case. This will allow it to copy the current case that I have into a new one. Then I can actually make a new one. So I could call it account 2. And I could once again create a third case and call it account 3. Now, if I go and save this and execute my APT once again, you will find that it will run the entire process, all 3 recordings, 3 times. First with the input of the GS 2020 account, then the account 2, and then the account 3. And please note that every time that you do this, you will have full coverage like you do from documentation. So you can actually produce the video from your test run and watch through if something fails, why did it fail, what happened on the screen, even though you didn't monitor it while executing. All right, so that's basically what I have for you in this session. So if we just go back to my slide deck, let's go to the final one. Let's see if I can go there. So if you have any questions, now's the time. If you don't have time, or if we run out of time in 1 minute, use the hub. We will answer all of your questions during the conference or after the conference. So thank you very much for your time. After this session, please join the Morten's Corner, right? It's fantastic.
There is one question here from Sonny, and there's a question: is there a future version of ClickLearn? Is it possible to run these tests in the background or in batch mode rather than using replay on a computer that cannot be touched during the test run or replay?
Yes, there is. Basically, you can set it up with the current version as well. If you set up, for example, a virtual machine where you can have it running there without being actually, you can go remote desktop to it and get it started. You can even start it from the command line or the task scheduler. That's actually possible. But to give you an insight into the future, for web-based applications like customer engagement, we will in the future be able to replay this in the cloud simply just by executing it on the ClickLearn cloud.
Fantastic. I see there are a few more questions, but unfortunately we're out of time. But fear not, they will be answered, and the answers will be given to you, so that you have them later. Thank you.
Thank you so much.